My name's Matt. Most days, my life feels about as predictable as the Georgia weather, quiet, steady, with the occasional storm rolling through just to keep you on your toes. I've lived in the same small town near Savannah for most of my adult life. My wife, Sophie, and I have been married long enough to know each other's quirks by heart. We bought our little house on Magnolia Lane after a year of saving, had the same neighbors since we moved in, and until recently I never imagined much could disrupt that routine. That evening, one I remember down to the smell of rain on the driveway, started off as normal as any. I left work a little after 5, already running through a mental checklist. Did we need more coffee? Was there milk in the fridge? Should I pick up something for Sophie's lunches? It's the kind of small, everyday stuff that fills your head when you're settled into a comfortable rhythm. By the time I pulled into our gravel drive, it had started to drizzle, just a mist at first, then one of those southern downpours that comes out of nowhere. I could hear the frogs in the creek behind the house and the distant rumble of thunder as I grabbed the mail and jogged to the door. Inside, everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Sophie's shoes in the hallway, the stack of unopened Amazon boxes by the coat rack, the faint smell of cinnamon from the candle she always lights when it rains. I kicked off my shoes, hung up my jacket, and started dinner, her favorite, lemon chicken and roasted potatoes. I figured I'd surprise her, maybe lift her spirits. She'd been stressed lately, something about deadlines piling up at her agency, but I never pried. A text buzzed my phone just as I started peeling potatoes. Sophie, hey, server went down at work. Might need to log in from home tonight. Don't wait up for me at dinner if you're hungry. I wrote back something quick, no worries, I'll save you a plate, and didn't think too much of it. She's always been dedicated to her job, sometimes to a fault. By 7:30, the rain was coming down in sheets, rattling the windows and soaking the street outside. I kept glancing at the clock, half listening for her car in the driveway. She finally came home a little after 8, headlights cutting through the storm as she pulled in fast, barely bothering to close her umbrella before hurrying inside. Sophie looked worn out. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks, her mascara slightly smudged, and she was shivering. But what really struck me was how she barely said a word, not even a hello, just a quick nod as she brushed past me. I tried to smile, holding out a towel. Rough night at the office? She muttered something about IT disasters and deadlines, not even glancing at me as she shook off her jacket. Then, before I could say another word, she dug through her tote bag and pulled out a small black external hard drive, the kind you use for backups or moving big files. She stared at it for a second, her jaw tight, then marched straight to the old roll-top desk in the hallway. I watched as she unlocked the bottom drawer, the one that always stuck a little, and shoved the hard drive inside. She locked it again, slipping the key into her jeans pocket, and for a split second, her eyes flicked up to meet mine. The look on her face was hard to describe. There was a flicker of annoyance, maybe even fear, but mostly it was just closed off. "What's that?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out a little too light. She spun around, voice sharp. "It's nothing. Just some boring reports I have to back up for a client. Don't open that, okay?" She said it fast, like she'd practiced the answer in her head. "All right," I said, raising my hands. "Didn't mean to pry." Sophie huffed, turned on her heel, and disappeared upstairs, mumbling about needing to change out of her wet clothes. I stood in the hallway for a second, staring at the locked drawer, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. While she was upstairs, I set the table for 2 and checked my phone again, just old texts, nothing new. The sound of her footsteps overhead was oddly careful, almost like she was trying not to be heard. When Sophie came back down, she'd changed into sweats and a faded UGA t-shirt, her hair pulled up messily. She glanced at the plate I'd made her, forcing a tight smile. "Thanks," she said, her voice flat. She poked at her food for a bit, mostly in silence, then got up halfway through dinner and said she needed to check on something for work. She didn't take her plate, just drifted back into the den with her phone. I finished eating alone, the rain tapping against the window. I tried to focus on the news, but my mind kept drifting back to the hard drive, her sudden coldness, and the way she locked the drawer like it was holding something precious. When I carried the dishes to the sink, I found her standing at the den window, staring out into the storm. Her phone was lit up in her hand, but she locked the screen when she heard me come in. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She jumped a little, then nodded. "Just a lot on my mind. Sorry if I'm being weird. I just need to focus tonight." There was a distance in her voice I couldn't ignore, something brittle, something that made my chest tighten a little. Later that night, after Sophie had gone up to bed, I lingered downstairs, replaying the evening in my head. The way she'd guarded that hard drive, the quickness of her temper, even the way she'd barely touched her food. I chalked it up to stress at first, but deep down I felt a nagging anxiety that wouldn't go away. I tried to shake it off as paranoia. After all, every couple goes through rough patches. We'd had fights before, about money, about her job, about my lack of ambition, her words, not mine. But this was different. It felt secretive, like I was suddenly an outsider in my own house. Before going to bed, I paused at the desk in the hallway. I ran my hand over the drawer, half tempted to check if it was really locked. I stopped myself, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Trust is the foundation of any marriage, I reminded myself, but for the first time I wondered if ours had started to crack. I turned out the lights and climbed the stairs, the house quiet except for the steady patter of rain. In our bedroom, Sophie was already under the covers, turned away from me, scrolling through her phone with the brightness down low. I lay awake a long time, listening to the storm and the quiet hum of my wife's secrets. That night, something changed. I couldn't name it yet, but the feeling lingered, the sense that whatever normal meant for us, it had shifted and there was no going back. Lying in bed that night, I stared up at the ceiling, listening to Sophie's soft breathing on the other side of the mattress. I wanted to believe everything was fine, that this was just a rough week, that the tension would pass like it always did. But as the hours crawled by, my mind started turning over the last few months, piecing together moments that, on their own, hadn't seemed important. Now, under the weight of that one strange evening, they started to look different. I remembered how Sophie had started coming home late more often. She'd always had the occasional late night, especially when she was prepping for a big presentation or closing out a client's account. But lately, it was every week, sometimes 2 or 3 times. She'd text me short updates, running behind, or big client call, don't wait up. I'd respond with a thumbs up or a joke, not wanting to be the clingy husband. But each time, she walked through the door later and later, always with a story about traffic or a meeting that ran over. She was polite but distant, like she was going through the motions. A few weeks back, I'd spotted that same external hard drive in her bag when she left it on the kitchen counter. I'd asked her about it, trying to keep my voice casual, is that your work backup thing? She'd barely looked up from her phone. Yeah, a client wanted me to keep some files at home. Can't risk losing their data. That struck me as odd. Sophie was always adamant about leaving work at the office, saying she needed space to unwind. Now she was bringing home sensitive files, locking them away like state secrets? I'd brushed it off at the time, but the question nagged at me. I started noticing other things too. She was making more trips to Savannah and, sometimes, to neighboring towns, always for client meetings or presentations. She'd come home with receipts from coffee shops and restaurants, and when I asked how it went, she'd give vague answers. It's work, she'd say, shrugging like it was too boring to explain. She'd gotten more protective of her phone too. Before, she'd leave it lying around the house or plugged into charge on the kitchen counter. Now, she kept it in her pocket or purse, always on airplane mode, even at home. Once I asked if she was waiting for a call and she laughed a little too loudly, just sick of all the spam calls lately. After that, she started taking her calls out on the porch, closing the door behind her. What really set me on edge was the way Sophie's moods started swinging. One day, she'd be sweet and almost clingy, asking if I wanted to go for a walk or watch a movie together. The next, she was distant, picking little fights about chores or acting annoyed if I asked about her day. She'd talk about how stressed she was, how her agency's expectations were getting higher and higher, how she wished she could just run away to the beach for a week and forget about everything. I tried to be supportive. I offered to help with chores, suggested she take a weekend off to recharge, even planned a little getaway to Tybee Island. She said she was too busy with work, that she couldn't take the time off right now. She'd smile and thank me, but the smile never quite reached her eyes. There was one night that sticks with me. Sophie came home around midnight, wearing a new red coat I'd never seen before. She tried to slip upstairs without waking me, but the sound of her keys in the door pulled me out of a light sleep. I sat up in bed and watched as she tiptoed into the room, reeking of strong perfume and something else, cologne, maybe, not the kind I wore. I asked, half asleep, long night. She paused, her eyes darting away. Yeah, the girls took me out after work for a drink. It was some bachelorette thing for a friend in HR. She stripped off her coat and slid into bed without another word. The next morning, I noticed a small shopping bag tucked into her closet, fancy lingerie, still with the tags on. I asked about it, and she laughed it off, saying the girls all bought silly things as a joke for the party. The memory of that night haunted me. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. But as the little moments added up, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the guarded hard drive, the new clothes she never wore around me, my mind kept drifting to the same conclusion. Something was going on and I wasn't being told the truth. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I tried to talk myself out of it, telling myself marriages go through rough patches, that stress can make people act weird. But the more I replayed the details, the more obvious it became that trust was slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of doubt. I started to question myself, too. Was I doing something wrong? Was I not paying enough attention? I replayed old arguments in my head, wondering if I'd pushed her away without realizing it. But no matter how I twisted the facts, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie's secrets weren't about me, they were about her. Things kept building from there. The next week, Sophie spent 3 nights in a row working late, and when she came home, she was jumpy and distracted, barely speaking to me. Her phone was always face down, notifications muted. When I asked if everything was okay, she snapped at me, "I told you, I'm under a lot of pressure. Stop making it worse." That was the first time she'd raised her voice at me in months. It was like living with a stranger, someone who wore my wife's face, but whose thoughts and feelings were suddenly off limits. The distance between us grew, quiet but relentless, and I realized that, little by little, I was losing her, and maybe, without even knowing it, she was already gone. By the following week, my patience was running on fumes. It's funny, I used to think I was a pretty trusting guy. I never snooped, never checked Sophie's texts or emails, never even wondered where she was going unless she told me. But the sense of unease was starting to eat me alive. I felt like I was living in a fog, waiting for a sign, a reason, a moment that would let me finally stop second-guessing myself. It came on a Thursday night. Sophie said she needed to run out to the store for some last-minute groceries, something for a potluck at her office, she said. She left in a hurry, grabbing her purse and keys, barely meeting my eyes as she slipped out the door. The sound of her car engine faded down the street, and I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the closed drawer in the hallway. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was weeks of little betrayals, her silence, her secrets, the way she'd started hiding pieces of herself from me. Maybe I just needed proof, one way or another, so I could stop torturing myself with doubt. All I know is I found myself standing in front of that old roll-top desk, listening to the rain against the windows, heart pounding like I was about to break into someone else's house. I felt almost guilty as I slid open the top drawer and started looking for the key. Sophie had always been organized, but she wasn't exactly sneaky. It didn't take long. I found the tiny silver key taped under her box of stationery, exactly where she probably thought I'd never look. I hesitated for a second, my hand trembling as I fit the key into the lock. I told myself it was wrong, that I was betraying her privacy, that if there was an innocent explanation, I'd never forgive myself for this. But my gut overruled my conscience, and I twisted the key. The drawer slid open with a soft click, and there it was, the black external hard drive, cold and unremarkable like any other piece of plastic in the world. I plugged it into my laptop at the kitchen table, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely type in my password. The drive word to life. For a second I almost closed the lid, but I made myself look. There was a folder right at the top, no password, no encryption, just labeled backups. I opened it. Inside were dozens of files, Word docs, spreadsheets, but mostly videos. My heart hammered in my chest as I clicked on the most recent one, the date matching the night Sophie said she was out late at a client dinner. The screen filled with the inside of a softly lit room I didn't recognize, but the camera panned and there was Sophie standing in front of a mirror. She was wearing the new lingerie I'd found in her closet, the kind she'd never worn for me. She looked nervous at first, glancing back at someone off camera. Then a man stepped into view. He was about my age, maybe a little older, with dark hair and a relaxed, confident grin. He put his hands on Sophie's waist and she smiled at him, a real, open smile I hadn't seen in months. I felt like the air had been ket out of the room. The rest of the video played out in a blur, soft words, laughter, touches that told a whole story without needing to spell it out. There was nothing left to interpretation. The way they moved around each other was in mate, familiar, the kind of closeness you can't fake. My stomach twisted as I watched Sophie lean into him, her body language so open, so trusting, it hurt to see. I couldn't look away, but every second made me feel smaller. When the video ended, I sat there frozen, staring at the screen, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I checked the file info, the timestamp, the location, all of it lined up with nights Sophie had said she was somewhere else. I opened a few more files, unable to stop myself. Each one was another gut punch, Sophie and this man together in different places, sometimes laughing, sometimes just sitting close on a couch, her head on his shoulder. There were texts too, saved as *TS messages that left no doubt. "I wish I could wake up next to you," she'd written. "Can't stop thinking about last night." By the time I finished, my hands were numb. There it was, the answer I'd been dreading, but also the one I'd known, deep down, was coming all along. This wasn't a one-time thing or a misunderstanding. This was cheating, planned and deliberate, with a level of Macy that told me it had been going on longer than I wanted to admit. A cold, hollow emptiness settled in my chest. I closed the laptop and stared out the window at the rain, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. It was as if everything I thought I knew had shifted. The person I trusted most in the world had gone out of her way to hide this from me, not just the act itself, but the whole secret life she'd built around it. There were no more excuses to make, no more doubts left to hide behind. All that was left was the fact: Sophie had betrayed me, and there was no way to go back to the way things were before. It's strange how quickly your world can shrink to a pinpoint. After I closed the laptop, the kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thin, like I couldn't breathe right. I just sat there at the table, my hands balled into fists, my brain refusing to process what I'd just seen. The rain outside kept coming down in sheets, thunder rolling in the distance, but I barely noticed. All I could do was replay the videos, the messages, the look on Sophie's face, how happy she seemed when she was with him. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe an hour. I heard the sound of Sophie's car in the driveway, her tires on the wet gravel, the familiar squeak of the brakes. Panic surged through me. I couldn't face her. Not yet, maybe not ever. I needed air, distance, anything to break the spell of that suffocating house and the secrets still humming in the drawer. On autopilot, I grabbed my keys and wallet, didn't bother with a jacket. I just needed to get out, to put as much road between me and Sophie as I could manage. I didn't even leave a note. By the time I made it to the car, my phone buzzed, Sophie's name on the screen, a text. "Hey, I'm home. Did you want me to grab dessert?" I ignored it, started the engine, and backed out into the street. I didn't have a plan, just an address burned into my mind, my grandfather's old apartment up in Charleston. It had been empty for months, but I still kept a key on my ring. It was far enough to feel safe, but close enough that I could make it without thinking too much. The drive was a blur, miles of wet highway, wipers smearing raindrops across the windshield, headlights painting the road in watery yellow streaks. My hands trembled the whole way, and I kept replaying the moment I'd found the proof over and over, like a scene from someone else's life. About halfway there, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Calls, texts, Sophie's name lighting up again and again. But the messages weren't what I expected, not apologies or pleas for me to come home. Instead, they were clipped, frantic, all about the hard drive. "Hey, can you call me ASAP? Matt, did you touch the hard drive? It's important for work. Matt, please answer. Did you open the drive?" She never once asked if I was okay or where I'd gone. She never mentioned anything about what I might have seen. All she cared about was that device, those files, the evidence of her betrayal. If I'd ever doubted her priorities, those texts cleared it up. By the time I pulled into the old apartment's lot, the storm had mostly passed. The air was muggy, but the streets were empty. I let myself in with shaking hands, dropped my bag just inside the door, and sat down on the musty old couch. The place smelled like dust and cedar and faded memories. Nothing like the home I tried to build with Sophie. I read Sophie's messages one last time before turning off my phone for good that night. The anger I felt wasn't just about the cheating or the lies. It was about the coldness, the calculation, the way she'd hidden things in plain sight and then tried to pretend it was all just work. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was just sorry she might get caught. As the hours ticked by, I drifted in and out of sleep, adrenaline wearing off and exhaustion setting in. My mind spun in circles, landing on all the little details I'd missed, all the ways I tried to convince myself everything was fine. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from being betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart. It left me feeling hollow, like the center of my life had caved in. By morning, the worst of the storm had passed, but the ache in my chest was still there, raw and deep. I knew I couldn't hide forever. Sooner or later, I'd have to go back, face Sophie, and decide what came next. But for that one night, in my grandfather's old apartment, I let myself feel it all. The shock, the anger, and the deep, empty sadness of losing the person I thought I knew. The next afternoon, I drove back to Savannah, my thoughts running in circles the entire way. I felt like a ghost drifting through my own life, barely noticing the changing scenery outside the window. Every mile closer to the house, my dread grew. I didn't want to see Sophie, didn't want to hear whatever half-truth she'd worked up in my absence. But there were things I had to collect, important papers, a few clothes, before I figured out where to go next. As I pulled into our driveway, I saw Sophie's car parked at an angle, like she'd rushed home in a panic. The porch light was on, even though it was still broad daylight. I sat in the car for a minute, trying to steady my breathing. I felt emptied out, but at the same time, some new kind of anger was starting to rise in my chest. I'd run away last night. Today, I wasn't going to run. When I opened the front door, Sophie was waiting in the hallway. She looked rough, eyes puffy, hair unbrushed, still in the clothes from the night before. For a second, neither of us spoke. I just stared at her, and she stared back, hugging herself like she needed the pressure to keep from coming apart. Finally, she broke the silence. "Where did you go?" Her voice was hoarse, but not gentle, more accusatory than worried. "You just left. You weren't answering. I thought something happened." I almost laughed at that. "You thought something happened? That's rich coming from you." She flinched, looking away. "Matt, did you open the hard drive?" She didn't even bother to dance around it. I stared at her, letting the silence hang. "Yeah, I opened it." "Want to explain?" She hesitated for a moment, eyes darting back and forth, searching for a lie that might make any of this okay. But she must have seen it on my face. How tired I was, how done. Because she just sighed, letting her shoulders slump. "You weren't supposed to see that yet." Yet? The word hit me like another slap. Yet? So what? This was all some grand reveal? "You were just waiting for the right time to blow up our marriage." She shook her head. "It wasn't like that. I didn't know how to tell you. Things have been off between us for a long time, Matt. You have to admit that." I felt my jaw tighten. "So you cheated because we had a rough patch? You lied for months because you were bored." She bristled, and suddenly, her sadness turned to anger. "You think this is all on me? You've been distant, Matt. You barely talk anymore, you come home and go straight to your routine." I felt like I was disappearing. I shook my head in disbelief. "You're really doing this? Shifting blame onto me? If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. But you didn't. You just hit it, over and over, and then tried to gaslight me into thinking I was paranoid." Sophie looked down, twisting her hands. "I left the hard drive out for you to find. I figured it was the only way this was going to end. Maybe I wanted to force it. I don't know." Her honesty caught me off guard, but it didn't make any of this better. If anything, it made it worse, knowing she'd let things rot on purpose instead of giving us even a sh*t at fixing it. "You're not even sorry," I said quietly. "You're just mad that you lost control of the story." She looked up, her expression hardening. "I'm sorry it happened like this. I'm sorry you're hurt, but I'm not sorry for finally putting myself first for once." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I realized then that the person standing in front of me wasn't my wife, not the person I'd built my life with. She was a stranger now, someone with her own reasons, her own secrets. Without another word, I walked past her and started gathering my things. Sophie followed me from room to room, but she didn't try to stop me. The only time she spoke was to say, "I guess this is it then." I nodded. "Yeah, this is it." When I had everything packed, I stood at the door for a long moment. I felt hollowed out, but there was relief there too. The fight was over, not just between us, but inside myself. I wasn't going to carry her guilt any longer. As I walked out, Sophie said, "You'll thank me someday for being honest, even if it was ugly." I didn't look back. I just shut the door behind me, letting the old life close quietly without one more word. A few days passed in a fog. I stayed at the apartment in Charleston, barely checking my phone, letting the silence settle in. Then one evening, I got a message from an unknown number. The text was direct. "Hey, my name's Tyler. I think we need to talk. It's about Sophie." For a split second, I almost ignored it. But curiosity and maybe a need for answers got the better of me. I called him. Tyler's voice was tense but honest. He explained he was the man from the videos. Sophie had told him she was divorced and living alone. He'd only just learned about me when she finally slipped up, and he immediately ended things. "She lied to both of us, man," Tyler said, almost apologetic. "If I'd known, I never would have been with her. As much as I wanted to hate him, I couldn't. We'd both been manipulated, both kept in the dark by someone who cared more about her secrets than the pain she left behind." After we hung up, a strange sense of relief washed over me, not joy, but closure. I finally saw the whole picture, even if it hurt. I cut off all contact with Sophie. No more texts, no calls, no drawn-out goodbyes. I moved my things into a small cabin by a quiet lake and started over. At first, the silence was brutal. I'd wake up in the morning reaching for someone who wasn't there. But over time, I found comfort in the ordinary things: fishing at sunrise, the smell of coffee in a quiet kitchen, reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with. The pain faded little by little, replaced by a stubborn kind of hope. I promised myself I'd never again settle for being someone's backup plan or secret. Looking back, I don't miss Sophie. I miss the life I thought we had. But now, with every peaceful day, I'm learning what it means to choose myself, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for the person I'm becoming. Freedom still stings, but it's starting to feel a lot like peace.